Thank you. I take the chance to present George Steve also. He's working with me in ICLE Europe, and he is the other moderator for today. So as I was saying, I wanted to present you the online tools, Hotmaps and Thermos. These tools can be very useful for heating and cooling planning. The first one, Hotmaps, is a GIS-based online software that can support heating and cooling planning by identifying location of heating demand and supply in a given area. It can also identify renewable energy sources and waste heat potential in an area. And we can also estimate the potential for district heating and analyze future scenarios. On the other hand, we have the Thermos tool, which is an also free web-based software for energy planning, but this would come a bit later in the process of heating and cooling planning, because this tool provides accurate heating and cooling network options analysis instantly. So it's very helpful to optimize the district heating and cooling planning processes. And as you can see in the image, it can help us design a whole district heating network, for example. And the other topic for today is solar heating and cooling planning, which can be a very effective solution when talking about heating planning, because as we all know, decarbonizing the district heating systems in Europe is a very huge challenge. So having this solar district heating as sorry, I lost connection for a minute. I was saying that having solar district heating can be a very good solution because it has proven to be very cost effective. And the online tools, Hotmaps and Thermos that I just mentioned, can help identify viable locations in terms of supply and demand, viable locations for installing these solar heat systems, and then they can help us design an optimal district heating network using this source of energy. And I also wanted to put this this picture for you, taken from the International Energy Agency, Task 52. This picture shows what is the potential for solar heat production in Europe, for using it for district heating networks with a price limit of 50 euro per megawatt hour. And as you can see, many countries in Europe have the potential for more than 1,000 gigawatt hour per year of heat production with solar heat. So that's a huge potential. And Poland is the first one in this list by a lot. This is because Poland has a lot of district heating that has to be decarbonized, and then therefore there's a potential for using solar heat here. Some southern countries like Spain that certainly have a lot of sunshine are not top in this list, not because we cannot use solar heat there, but rather because there's no district heating systems there, or not as many that could be fed by solar heat. But of course, there's potential there too for this technology. And having said this, I would like now to give the floor to Adit Maya. He's a research associate and PhD candidate at the Energy Economics Group of the Technical University of Vienna. He has a background in mechanical engineering and a master's in energy and environmental management. And his research focuses on strategic heating and cooling. He's also a partner of this project, the onHeat project. So Adit, please, the floor is yours. I will stop sharing now.
Thank you, Julian. Just give me a second to share.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see my screen?
Yes, all good.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah, hello, good morning, everyone. As Julian mentioned, of the two tools that we try to implement within the Act on Heat project, I'll be focusing more on the Hotmaps tool and staying within the scope of the energy sources in a given area. So to start with, the presentation today would be on giving you an overview of, as I mentioned, the application of hot maps for strategic heating and cooling planning, and also an overview of what exactly is the hot maps tool and the hot maps database, and also a live demonstration of tools within the hot maps toolbox that can be used for the set topics. Firstly, starting with the strategic heating and cooling planning. I don't know if you have already been to previous Act on Heat training sessions or presentations. You probably have seen this before, but if not, this basically gives you a workflow of how a heating and cooling strategic planning process looks like and how it should work. And there are different components of it. So the blue one on the top, the light blue one is basically what hot maps deals with, which is identifying potential inventory potential. So basically how the demand in any given region looks like, how are the supply infrastructure, existing supply infrastructure, how can it be further developed, and how are the renewable energy potentials. So for instance, how solar PVs or solar thermal potential look in a given region that you're studying, or so these are the aspects that are covered in inventory potentials. And the second component that hot maps deals with is zoning. So this would basically be identifying specific locations where you can further enforce the application of decarbonization for your particular region. So for instance, you could find areas where with buildings that have high potential or economic viability for retrofitting, or maybe potential locations for district heating implementation. So the hot maps tool can also provide you with a possibility of identifying these zones, and that's something we'll also be looking further into the slide presentation today. And combining these inventory potentials and zonings, the hot maps tool also provides a possibility of analyzing different scenarios and then comparing scenarios to finally develop heating and cooling transition strategies and develop policy level policies which can be further actually be used for implementation, and which then once these scenarios are identified, the further detailed feasibility planning and implementation of the projects would be supported by Thermos as in the scope of Act on Heat, and which should further be discussed later in this later today. But just to give you firstly an overview of the hot maps database and toolbox. To start with, what is hot maps? So hot maps is a toolbox to support public authorities, energy agencies, and planners in strategic heating and cooling planning. And it provides analysis on local, regional, national, and also EU levels. So basically, hot maps was the outcome of the hot maps project developed under Horizon 2020 from 2016 to 2020. And it gives you it is fully open source and provides you a platform where you can plan your heating and cooling strategies. And also because within the project, it was developed in collaboration with other pilot cities or municipalities across Europe. So the entire tool itself is quite fit for application and compatible for all of EU 27. And the tool, though we already have a working version in place and online, the tool is still under development, and we are trying to add new features within the tool, which can further improve the outputs or the results the tool can provide. And so what can it actually be used for? Firstly, because it's a geospatial tool, it provides the possibility of visualization of your data with regards to GIS analysis, or also maybe comparing. So suppose you have better heat demand data available with you for your specific region, and there is something already available as default within the hot maps tool. So maybe you can compare your data to see how realistic the hot map application actually becomes, or what are the deviations from your local data, and understand why this is happening. Also, there are different calculation modules that allows you to analyze heating and cooling systems. So for example, you can estimate how, under different assumptions, how your heating demand would develop over the next 20, 30 years, or how the district heating expansion potential is in your particular region, or how solar PV or solar thermal can be actually implemented into your system. And also provides a quick analysis. So as I mentioned, there are default data available within the Hotmaps tool. So with using these default data, it gives you a quick analysis of what are the potentials in your region. And also there's the possibility to add your own data. So this gives a more, let's say, a more region specific outputs as per your requirements. And also there's the possibility of development of strategies. So you could also combine different tools. So for instance, the output of one tool could be the input of the other. So with this, we call what we call the tool chain, and a combination of calculation modules can be used to develop strategies and further on develop policies for implementing this into the heating and cooling process. And also with this, you could analyze different scenarios and how the economic and environment performance of these scenarios look like. And again, as I mentioned, all of this can be done in all levels of local, regional, national, and EU levels. And the Hotmaps project itself has three major outputs: the database, the toolbox, and the wiki. So the database is basically an open source database where you can access data for all of EU27, which consists of data ranging from building stock to energy demand to renewable energy potential, which I can show you once we have a look into the tool. And also we are still continuously developing the database, updating it on the other different Horizon 2020 projects. And the second part is the toolbox itself, which consists of these calculation modules, which can be used for estimating, or as I mentioned, for different strategic level planning processes. And also there are already a number of calculation modules that exist within the Hotmaps tool, but we're still trying to add further different calculation modules to further improve the toolbox. And then the third part is the wiki, which is basically a summary, or rather a detailed explanation of the database and toolbox. So if Hotmaps is an interest to you for you, and you want to apply it for your specific region, I would highly recommend to start with the wiki, which provides a very descriptive, detailed information on how all of these databases and toolbox work. And also available in all EU27 languages. So that would be the three components of the Hotmaps project itself. And now I will will go into the live demonstration of the Hotmaps database and toolbox. So for this, we're staying within the scope of today's presentation. I'll cover three different calculation modules: the solar, thermal, and PV potential, the district heating potentials. There are two kinds of it based on the user-defined thresholds and the potential economic assessment. So for this, we move into the Hotmaps toolbox, which is available in the link here. So this directs us to the Hotmaps toolbox page, which looks like this, which is available online. And here you can go into the Hotmaps project website if you want to learn something about the project. There's a link to the wiki, and then there's the link to the GitLab, which has these open source databases. And there's the GitHub repository, which basically has the codes of the calculation module if you are really interested in that. So just to give it's basically showing a map of all of Europe, and where you can switch between different NUTS levels that you are trying to work on. You can go down as to local administrative units levels, but just for visualization, let's keep it at NUTS level 2. And then the most important part of it would be the layers that is available within the Hotmaps toolbox. So for instance, since I'm in Vienna right now, if we go to Vienna, we can see right now how the distribution of the heat demand density looks like. So basically what this figure is telling is that per pixel, per cell, so per hectare cell, how is the distribution of the heat demand in Vienna. And so as we can see, I mean, makes sense. The high demand areas are around the city center, whereas the outskirts have a much lower demand, ranging over 5,000 megawatt hour per hectare to about 100 megawatt hour per hectare. So this is basically one of the most important data that the Hotmap datasets can provide. And if you want to know how, for example, these are not measured data, but rather estimations from a top-down approach. So if you're interested in how actually these are generated, then the description are available in the link here. But nevertheless, if you want to further work locally on your GIS software, then there's the possibility to download the default data, which downloads it as a TIFF file. And so for this also, so we have the heat demand density total, we have for the residential and non-residential sector, and we have for the cooling also different data on building floor areas, which are quite important for this district heating planning. And also we have information on industry, so for instance, availability of excess heat and then renewable energy potential. So for instance, there is also information on solar radiation and building footprints. So you can just turn this off. Yeah, basically it shows how is the solar radiations distributed in all across the city. And that would be something that could be interesting for us. And then potentially for rooftop solar collectors, how's the potential on a hectare cell resolution? So we can see it's quite low. So 170 megawatts hour maximum. So that's mostly in the city centers. And also there's the possibility of default data sets, for instance, say on open field solar thermal potential, which is available by default here. So for instance, within the Vienna region, there are like places on the outskirts which could be possible for solar thermal, but we would have to further look into detail what exactly are the assumptions underlying here. So these would be the layers that are already available, and you can just access it, download it, and use per as need. But if you want to have a little more detailed analysis, then we would look into the calculation modules. So as I mentioned, we'll be looking into 3 of them. There are quite a few available here. So starting with the solar thermals. So let's say, just I can switch this on just for visualization. And if we go into the solar thermal PV calculation module, so every time you open a calculation module, this is what comes up. So it's a description of the calculation module and how it's worked. And if you want a more detailed description on its actual functionality, how it's working on the background, there you can always open the wiki, which leads you to this particular page. It has a detailed description on the working and also examples on how you can actually run it. So for lost my screen. Yeah. So for instance, right now to run on a very simple example, let's say we can call it something like test 1. And then, so for the basic input, what you can only give is, let's say you have a policy that 10% of the buildings in Vienna or the rooftops in Vienna should have solar PV. So just by giving this simple input, and then it takes in the default input of building footprints in the city and also the solar radiation. So it's taking in default data because I haven't uploaded any data on my own. So, but for instance, if you have better building footprint data, you could do that for your specific region and then run the calculation module. And I hope it gives some results. So basically, it should be giving me areas that have potential for installing a rooftop solar PV. So and also solar thermal. So basically, the results that is giving me is like first overall the heat demand in Vienna is in the range of 17,500. And then, so per cell, the cell with the maximum heat demand is about over 8,700, and the minimum demand cells are 0.01 megawatt hour per hectare per year. But the results of this calculation module would be something with regards to PV energy production. So if we cover 10% of the buildings in Vienna, we would have the potential to cover about 167 gigawatt hours with an investment cost of 302 million euros. And right now, the default assumption the calculation module is taking is that there are 3 kilowatt peak systems. So a total of 50,000, over 50,000 of these systems would be required with the levelized cost of energy. And similarly for the thermal aspects as well. And it's also you can download these results in form of a CSV file. And also with regards to graphics, it gives you the hourly profiles for the PV and monthly profiles for the PV, as well as the thermal, solar thermal. I mean, just looking at for visualization is all good, but just running one simulation for a region doesn't really give you a more quantifiable output. So the idea would be to run this similar scenario for different, run this calculation module for different scenarios, changing the, let's say, the percentage inputs, or rather there are advanced level inputs such as how your financial parameters would look like, and also the efficiency of your system, changing the type of system that you're using. So basically the tool would give you the potential locations where installing a solar PV would be feasible in your region. And I mean, it is it just gives an overview for the planning process. And of course, if you want to install a solar PV and implement this project, then a more detailed system sizing would have to be done. And also, if I now go back to the layers, the test one that we had, it creates a TIFF file, which can always be downloaded and further analyzed in or used in other GIS-based applications. So that would give you the solar potential. And with regards to zoning, again, moving to a second calculation module, we're looking into the user-defined threshold. So this is a very simple approach to identify locations where district heating grids can exist. So for instance, again, it gives you the description, and maybe I can just do a test too. And so what this calculation module basically requires, what it is doing is based on certain threshold, let's say 500. So it excludes all hectare cells that have demands of less than 500 megawatt hour per hectare. And then clusters is based on a total limit. So for instance, let's say 50. So it clusters regions which have a total annual heating demand of 50 gigawatt hours. And the input it takes is basically just the heat demand total density, which again, I'm using the total, the default data. But if you have better heat demand density, you can always upload and run this calculation module with your own data. So when I run this, this would give me these regions which have the possibility of, or basically high demand areas which have possibility for district heating. So for instance, at this limits, we see that the overall heating demand of the entire city was 17,500, which is the same as here. But with district heating, there is potential to cover about, or rather with this, these high demand points constitute about 15,000. That would be about 87% of the total heat demand in the city. And so looking at the graphics, we can see that, so for instance, here, it seems to have identified 3 potential locations, so 1, 2, and a small one here. And what it says is that the potentials for coverage in the, I think this is probably the second one here, covers about 13,000 gigawatt hours. The second one here about 2,000, and the third one. So these are, it's just basically clustering these locations to see what can be done with regards to district heating potentials, and further we can analyze or based on these zones, individual policy level interventions can be done for each zones on how actually to develop the heating and cooling demands. District heating networks. So that was a very simplified tool for the user-defined thresholds. And then we have something called economic. Again, there are layers generated, which can be again downloaded for the test too. And finally, we move into the third calculation module, which is a bit more detailed assessment of, we need to move to Law 2, sorry. And then let's say, so this calculation module is kind of a more detailed analysis, and because it takes some time to run for all of Vienna, I just try to run it for this region here. So what this calculation module does is basically based on certain constraints of grid expansion costs, the actual construction costs of the grid. It tries to limit, staying within these cost ceilings. It tries to identify potential locations for district heating. And for this, it takes into, for example, when you're trying to implement the district heating grids. And for instance, you start with the year 2018 and go to the year 2030, and you try to see, so you also estimate how your demands would develop. So for instance, if you do some renovation activities over these years, if I run this calculation module, I am sure it's just not going to be something interesting, but basically it just identified this location as potential for district heating. And so, and it also gives the cost for having this district heating system here and locations. So, I mean, this was not really an interesting output, but I just have something from my old results, which could be interesting. I can just quickly show you. Yeah, so this was something we applied that calculation module for San Sebastian, which identified these potential locations for potential district heating grids, and which can further be analyzed now for making use of, let's say, Thermos to identify the grid networks. So basically, the tool was able to identify the most economically viable locations for district heating. And yeah, so I will not go into this then. So basically for San Sebastian, there were different scenarios were developed, and we identified these blue regions and green regions, which have different levelized cost of heat for the district heating grid construction. And based on your strategies, it would now, the results from the Hotmaps tool, we could further evaluate which of these scenarios is most feasible for a specific location. So that would be the outcome of the economic module. And just to conclude, so we have, so you can find the links of each of these components of the Hotmaps project here, which you find in the presentation. And finally, if you're interested in a more detailed training, I know what I did here was just a brief overview. And if you're more interested in more detailed training, you can contact my colleague, Marcus Hummel, or you can also write to me. And right now, if you have any questions, I'd be trying to answer. Sorry, I was a bit too fast because there was a lot of content to cover. And yeah, so that's all from me. If you have any questions, or Yulin.
Yeah, thank you, Adit. That was very, very thorough, actually, I would say. And we can obviously talk about this for a long time. This is why we had the trainings and such. So there's obviously lots of content. What I would say for the questions, I noticed that in the chat, there are at least 2 questions that are directed to you. So you could maybe answer them directly within the chat itself to everybody. But otherwise, I would hand it over to Martin to briefly discuss things. Just to introduce him briefly, he is a senior technical consultant for the Center for Sustainable Energy in Bristol. He has extensive technical engineering experience in sustainable energy and 15 years of project management. And he has experience in energy efficiency analysis, renewable energy feasibility, energy auditing, community energy, and he's a project partner at onHeat, specializing in the Thermos tool, which he will briefly present now.
Thank you very much, George. So hopefully everyone can hear me and see my screen.
Yes.
Yep, great. So yeah, morning everyone. So this is a very quick run through the optimization and supply elements of Thermos. So it's just a 5-minute presentation. So it's just really covering the essentials as such. So first of all, just a quick reminder about Thermos, what it stands for: Thermal Energy Resource Modeling and Optimization System, and what it can do. So an open source web-based software tool. It does quite sophisticated demand estimation, and it does optimization as well, both of the network and the supply, which I'll briefly run through next. And yeah, the level of analysis, we tend to categorize it as pre-feasibility, although some elements of it, we do find that users use it for more detailed feasibility as well. There's certain elements in there which, for example, consultants find quite useful. So yeah, it's the output of the Thermos project, which ran in parallel to the Hotmaps project, actually, that Adit was talking about. It finished a couple of years ago now, and it's got a lot of users around Europe and beyond. And yeah, we're monitoring to some extent the use of it, and we're learning all the time. So we hope to develop it further based on feedback from users such as yourselves. So just to kick off then, first of all, very quick summary of the optimization feature of Thermos. And I'm assuming a sort of basic level of understanding of Thermos here, but what we're looking at now is the sort of screen interaction, the sort of the user interface part. This is a screenshot from that, and what we've done at this point is kind of defined the network. So we've come up with a scenario from which we then ask Thermos to optimize. So you have to set this up by importing a map, basically, and Thermos will then estimate the energy demands of all the buildings on that map, and you then categorize all the buildings according to whether they should be optional in the problem, in the scenario, whether they should be required, so the model will be forced to include them in the problem, or whether they'll be forbidden. You know, they shouldn't be included in the problem. And alongside that, once you've set all those categories for the buildings, you include all the routes between the buildings as well that you may want the network to follow. So essentially, you're just specifically, and you end up with something that looks a bit like that. So blue here indicates that all these are optional. I would have done a live demo of this, but there wasn't quite time, so just showing a few slides here of the outputs. The next thing to do is to include your supply points. So that's what you can see there indicated by the arrows. There's two here. If we just go on to the next slide, that's kind of zoomed in on those, and you can see the two orange points there. The one on the bottom left is actually an existing building, so that could be an energy plant. It could be a new one, or it could be an existing building that you convert into an energy plant. It could be CHP, it could be biomass, for example. And the one up in the top right-hand corner is one that I've just kind of invented, and you can see it's in the corner of a field there. So that could potentially be like a heat pump, for example, ground source heat pump, or even solar to some extent. I'll talk about solar in a minute, because there's certain restrictions with Thermos in using that technology for an input. But basically, for the optimization of the network, in terms of the supply, all you need to define about that supply, or supplies, depending on how many you've got, is that information there. So Thermos wants to know about the maximum capacity of that supply, and then the cost of the actual energy plant. And there's several ways of expressing that, you can see there. And also the cost of the heat. And there's also some information on emission factors that you can put in there, which is optional. But in order to optimize the network, that's all Thermos needs to know about the supply. So it's at this stage, it's kind of fairly technology neutral. So once you've got that information, you can then press the button essentially on Thermos, and the algorithm will then go through many calculations very, very quickly to look at what the best option is for a network. And it's basically working that out according to one of two objectives that you've pre-selected. One of those is based on NPV, so it works out what it tries to maximize the revenue to the operator of the network. So that's the basis of the calculation. The other objective that you can choose is called the whole system. And in that case, it will look at minimizing the total cost of the system. So two different approaches there, and they will produce different results. And you can also allocate, you can also tell Thermos to, if it doesn't think a building is worth going on the network for whatever reason, it can, you can apply insulation measures to that building as well through Thermos, and it then puts that into the calculation. So this is, if I just go back to, you can press the button to optimize, and this is what's happened in this case. The sort of the brown stroke red color there, that's the actual network that Thermos has worked out. And you can see it's covered most of the buildings that were selected. So there's many factors why it does that, mainly to do with cost, but to do with distance and you know, the location from the two heat sources, that kind of thing. And then that's your network optimized, and you've got a whole load of outputs then, and you can go back and you can tweak those and run it again. And run it again. So it's very rapid in that sense. It can, the larger the problem, the longer it will take. So it's better to start small. But yeah, that's the power of the tool. And then just finally, very quickly on energy supply. So I've talked about optimization of the network. Thermos will also optimize the energy supply, and it does this as a separate kind of thing. This is where you can set up a series of demand profiles. So because when you're optimizing the energy supply, you obviously need to take into account the cost of energy, and there's a profile for that. You know, you might get different costs at different times of the day, for example, and so you can set heat profiles and fuel price profiles up here over a kind of 24-hour period, and set all those parameters there. You can then define your supply technologies. You can see there's a heat pump and natural gas put in there, and you can set the parameters for those, the capacities and the costs. You can also add substations if you're dealing with things like CHP and storage technologies as well. And once you've optimized, then you get a whole series of outputs, including visuals there on the supply profiles of what you've optimized. You can then kind of look at the costs and compare with what you've optimized for the network and go back and repeat and change things in that way. What I should say is, because this session is really focusing on solar thermal, at the moment Thermos doesn't really, it can't really account for the seasonal variation in solar thermal plant. You know, the summer, winter, it can't refine that to the level that you need to at the moment. It's something we're looking into, and we hope to be able to include that at some point. But yeah, it's that's something that is hopefully in the pipeline. But yeah, there's ways that you can model your energy supplies anyway in different ways. So that's just a very quick run through of the optimization features of Thermos, both on the network and the supply side. The tool is available at the link there, you can see, and yeah, happy to be contacted about further information or answer any questions in the Q&A at the end. So
yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. I noticed there was already one question in the chat that was directed to both you and Adit, so maybe you might have a look at that. And speaking of solar thermal, as you were at the end, then the next and final speaker will be Bärbel Epp, who is the founder and managing director of the German market research agency Solrico. She has which has a focus on solar district heating and solar process heating. She's responsible for international newsletter of the web portal solarthermal.org, and which reports exclusively on market technology trends in solar heating and cooling globally. And she also supports the International Energy Agency's solar heating and cooling program since 2015. So I hand it over to Bärbel.
Yeah, thank you very much. Great introduction. I really enjoyed the two presentations and the way that really solar thermal is considered in these powerful tools. Yeah, I think we are short in time. I hope that you give me some time at least. I'm talking about solar district heating and solar heat for cities, towns, and energy communities with a lot of examples on behalf of the IEA Solar Heating and Cooling Program, which is a global research program, and we have set up this information package together. It has a much longer format. You will provide it by the organizers of the webinar afterwards, and I will only give you some snapshots on it because the time is short. Yeah, what is district heating all about? We have 6,000 district heating networks all across Europe. It's a huge work to decarbonize all of them. The EU have given very strict regulations now that after 2035, already a high share of renewable and waste heat must be put into these district heating networks. And solar thermal is a proven, available, and cost-effective measure, as we have seen also in the previous presentations. Yeah, this is where solar heat, solar thermal, solar district heating is already found in Europe. You see that all the countries which are colored in yellow and dark orange have already solar district heating plants in place. In the boxes, the first number is the number of solar district heating plants. The second figure is the capacity. So obviously the dark colored countries like Austria, Germany, Denmark, and Sweden are the front runners. We have already 125 district heating plants in Denmark, 48 in Germany, but you see that it's a widespread phenomenon, and especially in the Balkan and in Southern Europe, we have big activities going on and large plants are announced. This is how it looks like. You have a collector field. On the one side, you always have a storage, which can be a short-term storage or a seasonal storage. This was mentioned by Martin, depending on the solar share you want to reach. You always need a heating center, which helps you to bring up the temperature of your solar field to what is required in the grid. This depends very much. There was a question in the chat on the renovation of your district heating plant already. I mean, you might have ones which are run at 120 degrees. You might have ones which are already run at 70 degrees. And lower the temperature is, the better this is for renewables and waste heat to be integrated. Yeah, the advantages is straightforward. It's absolutely carbon-free renewable, other than biomass, where in touristic areas, the summer smoke of the biomass plant is sometimes disturbing. Solar heat, there is no emission over the operating lifetime. It increases your energy security, obviously, a big issue after the gas crisis. Your heat stays affordable. A lot of these district heating utilities which run solar thermal plants profited from very constant heat prices also during the crisis. And the collectors are produced locally, which is a big advantage against PV, which is mostly coming from Asia. Yeah, this is, I wanted to stress that because you saw from the tool Hotmaps that PV produces a lot less on the same area than solar thermal when you looked into the gigawatt hours and terawatt hours that were mentioned in this tool. So we talk about a factor 3. Solar thermal has a better efficiency on the same area than PV and even a much better one than biomass. If you want to produce the same amount of energy on a biomass field, you need a factor 33 more land. So you have to consider that if you look into the possibilities of your area and your city. Yeah, well, we have cities from bigger and larger amounts. You have to start with that one. Mengsberg is a small town in Germany, only around 200 participants. They decided to build it completely new. They probably didn't know about thermos, but they managed to build, sorry, this way. All the red lines in this plan are new district heating lines, and they have a 100% renewable supply today based on biomass and on solar thermal, with a share of 17% biomass. So they have a 2 megawatt solar district heating plant. And maybe you keep this a bit in mind if I come to other examples. They have a much higher capacity. So this is this village. The same example here, a biomass and solar thermal triple district heating plant is situated near Riga in Latvia. This utility traveled to Denmark and was very inspired 2016 already by the huge fields that exist in Denmark. And they said they want to do the same thing. A northern side, they have nice yield there, and they have built this huge plant with the help of the Danish. They kept their energy prices stable, which they are very proud of. Because of this, independency, they have their own resources, solar and biomass, which is a very important argument for their clients. And this shows you again the same hydraulic scheme. Now we are talking about a 15 megawatt plant, which is mentioned above here, so the field is already like 7 times higher than the ones from Mengsberg I showed you before. It's a short-term storage, 22 kilometers district heating pipes are put around the city, and they have this wood chip boiler and gas boiler, which is distributed here, like 16% is solar, 72% is biomass, and the gas boiler covers 12%. Yeah, biomass and solar heat is actually a very good match because of 2 reasons mainly. I mean, the solar saves you a lot of wood in summer, which is also a cost-saving issue. And it preserves, you have a good time in summer because the boiler can be in standby, over the 3 months, because solar can cover the whole load of your district heating grid, and you have time to do the service life of your boiler. So this is a lot used in Austria and Sweden at the moment, this combination. That you can go far away from the cities also was mentioned in Hotmaps already. This is an example which is very far in planning already. It's in Kosovo, Pristina. It's next to a city which has 150,000 inhabitants. So you know that in the city center, you will never find an area suitable for such a big plant. It's a 40 megawatt plant. So it's again 4 kilometers away from the city already with their piping. This is a question of looking into losses and energy production over the year. So in this case, it's suitable to go 4 kilometers outside. And they have this blue line, which is also mentioned here, is the piping between the power plant, which is coal-driven at the moment still, and the future plan of the solar system, which is another 1.6 kilometers. So you see the distance, and gives you a big variety to look for suitable ground. This is now the same hydraulic scheme, again, very simple, of this planned big solar concept. We call it big solar. It was a concept that was created in Austria and applied now to a lot of huge plants in Europe. What is new here now? You have the collector field, you have the boiler house, and you have the city. These are the 3 components I showed you before. And what is new now, and this is what Martin mentioned, that this is not yet in their simulation, is this seasonal storage here, which is a huge basin, 410,000 cubic meters, which is really like a lake. It's covered with a ceiling where you can walk on, so it's not reducing too much of your ground. And it covers, it brings the solar of the summer, the extra energy of the summer, into the storage, and it's used in the winter period. And what is necessary for that is huge absorption heat pumps with 20 megawatts here, which can bring your temperature up in the autumn season, when your storage might be an 80 or 60 degree, to the temperatures which are required in the grid. And here are 2 grids. It's a big city, 125 and 80 degree. You see already that this cannot be provided directly with solar from a tank. So this is a new setting which is called big solar, and it will be applied to several plants in the near future in Europe. Here again, you know what seasonal storage means. You know, you have surplus energy in summer by the sun, which is reserved for these yellow marked parts in September until January. And you see here above the solar fractions that can be reached with these systems. So if you have a solar fraction with a short-term storage, as I showed you before, it's 5 to 20% of the annual total heat demand in your district heating. Whereas if you have a seasonal storage, it goes up to 50, 60, and we have these plants in Denmark running with these huge seasonal storages, which reached, you know, monitored 50 to 60 over the whole year. This is our biggest plant in Europe. It inspired a lot of other utilities across Europe. It's called Silkeborg, 110 megawatts. So you see again that it's even 2 times larger than the one I showed you in Kosovo. It's a big plant with a capacity of 110, producing 20% roughly of the city. It has no storage because here the summer load, the district heating grid is so big that the storage of the district heating, the volume of the district heating can be kept as a storage, which saves a lot of money, but it's not feasible in all sites. A last slide now on the costs. We have placed here Silkeborg with its actual cost of the year 2016, reaching with Danish sunshine, which is not so enormous as you know, 33 euro per megawatt hour. And if you place this huge plant somewhere else in Europe, as it was discussed before, you know, like Serbia has a big district heating grids. France has 300 district heating grids. I'm not aware. I think Spain has something like 120. Your costs go even down. And if you have a bit of in mind where the gas price was hitting to in the last months, it was like 100 and 120. You see that we have really, really cost attractive solar heat prices here. If you go large, I mean, if you do it very small, the prices are still different. So this was my input. If we have put these slides for your own records into the presentation, these are our research institutes that help you with your feasibility study if you want to go a bit closer into planning. And these are all turnkey providers that can give you offers. If you tender, you can contact them. This is only for your own services. These are all companies which already have experiences with solar heat. So this was it. Thanks for the giving me the floor. My name is here mentioned again, Bärbel @solvico.com. Feel free to contact us for any questions, technical or economical or whatever. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bärbel. Very interesting, very quick but dense content within your presentation. I will also point out that Bärbel has graciously provided us an even longer presentation that has even more information, which we can share with you also with all participants afterwards. I noticed that there is a quick question, rather quick question, I think, to Bärbel. Maybe you can say what is the current phase of implementation at the Pristina plant that you pointed out?
Yeah, well, they start with the tenders now. The financing is secured, which you all know is the most important step. And they will start with the tendering now. So they start construction already only next year, 2024. So the time frame is fairly long, but the engineering is very secured because Danish and Austrian companies were involved. So it's a very secured project, really. Yeah.
Very interesting to be happening in the Balkans as well. I notice in the participant list we also have others in the Balkans. So this maybe leads me to a very quick question to Adit and also to Martin. To what degree? So let's start with Adit. From the Hotmaps, it has lots of primarily EU maps in there. I noticed the UK was listed on there. Are there others outside of the EU? Are there possibilities to add new countries or regions into Hotmaps?
Yeah, thanks, sir. So regarding the data itself, so as you said, these are just limited to the EU countries. So default data is is missing from the Hotmaps toolbox for these countries. But nevertheless, the calculation modules are applicable for not just limited to EU, so anywhere in the world, I would say. So as long as you have data, if you have data available in these formats, for example, specifically the heat demand densities and the cross flow areas, the two most important, then the calculation modules themselves are applicable. But also within the Act on Heat project, we are working with a North Macedonian applicant where we are trying to develop these T4 data sets for North Macedonia as well. So I mean, though the data sets is not existing as I mean, there is definitely possibility of the use of the calculation modules.
Thank you for that. And then Martin, a sort of a similar question to you. I know that within this round of webinars, the Thermos is not the primary focus, but the next round will be focused more on Thermos. What do you say is the sort of data needs that are needed from anybody who wants to use Thermos?
Yeah. Okay. So thanks, George. The main thing is I would say energy demands. So Thermos by default it will use data from OpenStreetMaps, which has got reasonable coverage globally, but it's very variable in any one specific location. It might not cover all the buildings. So that you might be missing buildings, in which case you have to supplement that with your local data. So that's one thing to look at. And then also, yeah, for energy demands, Thermos can estimate those demands based on the polygon shape, the footprint of the building, but it will also estimate to a higher degree of accuracy if you've got the height of those buildings. And so that can be from something called LiDAR data, which you can then upload to Thermos, and you can get much better representations of energy demands. But better still is to have your own data for buildings that you're considering where possible, and you can upload that to Thermos, or you can edit it within the map, edit buildings as you go. So yeah, that's I think the essential data that people should be thinking about.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you to all the speakers, for the very interesting presentations and the participants. And yes, before we let you go, I would like to tell you a bit of the next step that we can have for this training. So first of all, I wanted to let you know that we can certify you for attending this training. You will only have to complete a short questionnaire that we will share with all of you after the session in a follow-up email, along with a recording in case you would like to go back to the recording and refresh your ideas. So yeah, don't worry if you didn't attend for the first webinar of this training. This will not be compulsory for getting the certification. So yeah, we really encourage you to do this if you would like to. Then we have the third and last training session on the 23rd of March on building a heating and cooling transition strategy. We encourage you to register there if you didn't do so already. I think my colleague shared a link in the chat. And I would like to let you know that ICLEI is also organizing a strategic heating and cooling support package for city representatives. This might be of your interest. The next module is on the 28th of March. It has also been shared on the chat, but I can share a link with you in the follow-up email. And finally, as always, you have further material on the Act on Heat website. So yeah, having said that, I would like to thank you all for attending today. Have a wonderful day. Thank you to the speakers, and see you in the next session. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.